afternoon and welcome to the third lecture in the Women on Stage series about women who have left their mark on the Art Nouveau style in Europe. Very nice to see that so many is here this afternoon. My name is Erin Stomner. I am a curator of learning activities and public programming at Jugendstilsenteret and Kube in Ålesund, Norway. One of the members of the Art Nouveau network. So today we are going to hear a lecture on Frida Hansen, one of the key figures in Norwegian textile art and Norwegian Art Nouveau. And so to that, I would like to introduce you Vibece Salthe, art historian and curator in Stavanger Art Museum, a museum with several tapestries by Frida Hansen in their collection. And Salthe is going to give us the lecture Art Nouveau and Stavanger, the tapestries of Frida Hansen. So thank you very much, Vibece, for being here and giving us this lecture today. And now we are all listening to you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. Yes, I work in Stavanger, and this is where I'm sitting also now. So as I'm going to talk about this lady here called Frederick Boletta Pettison, also known as Frida Hansen. Frederick Boletta Pettison was her maiden name. She was born in 1855 and died in 1913. She is a very important artist for our museum. She has become a household name in Norway, and we try as much as we can, together with Ålesund and other Norwegian museums, to get people to know her magnificent tapestries outside of Norway. Her main body of work spans from 1890 to 1914, and her production consists of 31 large format tapestries and approximately 165 patterns for portieres, floor carpets, wall works, cushions, tablecloth, and upholstery fabric, and what is called åklær, which is something that I will get back to. She was recognized in her day, as the quote that are on my slide shows. This is a quote from a lady who fought for women's rights in Norway. She was the first member of parliament, the first female member of parliament, and someone who interviewed Frida Hansen late in life for a book about famous Norwegians. And she wrote, and I quote, "Someone was needed who could reach into the dark past and retrieve the old noble art." And she talks about tapestries when she says that, "who could give it a new birth and develop it further. It had to be a genius. Frida Hansen came and managed everything." So although Frida Hansen was very well known during her day, very few Norwegian museums brought her in. So there are not so many, well, that has changed, but there were not so many tapestries within Norwegian collections. She did, however, get quite a few national and international prizes for her work, and was well known. In the 20s, she fell. She was gradually forgotten, which has to do with that she worked in the Art Nouveau style. After that period, where this style was on its heyday, it was declining, so she continued to work in that style. But it has also to do with the national building, the building of a national identity in Norway, where her tapestries will be looked upon as too international. So that is also one of the main reasons for her being left out of history during the 20s. So she was definitely subjected to a selective storytelling. In the 1970s, she was rediscovered, however, by Anniken Thue, who is the main scholar on Frida Hansen's artworks. She made an exhibition of her artworks in 1973, where the little red book that you see here, that's the exhibition catalogue, and also an oeuvre catalogue for Frida Hansen's production. And later she wrote this book here called Frida Hansen, the European in Norwegian woven art. That's from '86. Unfortunately, both of these books are out of stock, and they are written in Norwegian. The reason for Anniken Thue's rediscovery of Frida Hansen is that in 1970, there was an exhibition at Henjonstad Art Center in Norway called Norwegian Woven Art in 20th Century. And when she saw that exhibition, she also discovered this tapestry here, a magnificent tapestry that she realized that she had never seen this artist before, and she was amazed by the sheer glory of this work. And she was thinking, why do I not know anything about this artist? So so what she started was to map her production and really find out as much as she could about Frida Hansen, and what she did ended up in these two books and a dissertation. So she was definitely the one who rediscovered Frida Hansen within a Norwegian context. And about 40 years after this exhibition in Oslo in 1970, we made an exhibition here in Stavanger. That it was in 2015, and you see the book here, this greenish book, and the exhibition was called Frida Hansen, Art Nouveau in Full Bloom. So we are definitely trying as much as we can to enhance people's knowledge of her artworks, and we are also collecting her artworks, as are also other Norwegian art museums now. So going back to this magnificent tapestry, which is one of her main works, it was very soon after it was made. It was bought by the Museum für Kunst und Gewerbe in Hamburg, and we borrowed that tapestry for the exhibition in Stavanger. The tapestry is called the Milky Way, which is, of course, refers to our galaxy, but it's has also a text written on the bottom in Hebrew, and it says, "And let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light onto the earth." And this is from the Genesis, and that quote and that text, is from the creation story, and here the divine is represented through these women holding up this veil with the stars in our own galaxy. So this magnificent tapestry was what really got Anniken Thue into work with Frida Hansen and really map total oeuvre. This tapestry also, before I move on and talk a little bit about her life, the start of her life, and sort of tries to go a little bit more chronologically through her art. This tapestry was exhibited in London in 1900, where it won a gold medal, and it was also shown at the 1900 Paris Exposition. So, because I believe that most people do not, in an international context, do not know so much about Frida Hansen, so I will try to sort of guide you through her early years as well. So starting with this slide here, Frida Hansen was, as I said, born in Stavanger. She was born in 1855 on the 8th of March. Today, the Women's Liberation Day. It's almost as a fate of destiny that she was born on that day. Her parents, Mathilde Pettison and Peter Pettison. Her father was a wealthy businessman who ran the company Köhler and Co. He was one of the major actors in several of Stavanger's business sectors. And the two houses that you see, these are some old glass plate negatives from the museum collection. This is after Frida Hansen's family had left Hilleborg, but it shows the two houses, the one at the bottom where her mother lived later. The one on the top is where Frida Hansen lived with her husband and children. And as you can see, there is a winter garden there, which she was very proud of. Anyway, during her early years, they lived in the city center in the wintertime and out in Hilleborg, which is a little bit outside the city center. Today it's not, but at that time it was. So when Frida Hansen grew up, Stavanger was very much a small town with modest wooden houses. So although these houses that you see here are not big in an international context, in a European context, they were so in a Norwegian context. Frida Hansen's family belonged to a privileged minority. And at that time, the city of Stavanger experienced a tremendous economic growth and an increase, a rapid increase in population. She went to a girls' school to get teachings, and around confirmation time, she wanted to become a painter, and her parents said that it was okay for her to get some teaching from two of the artists in the area, Kitty Kielland and Johan Jakob Benete. You see Kitty Kielland is a portrait of Kitty Kielland, a very firm lady with a cigar here, and then one of her major works, Peatbog. All of these are in the Art Museum's collection, and then Johan Jakob Benete, who was a marine painter. So these are the ones who trained her. She didn't get a lot of training, but a little bit. And she had artistic inclinations. So moving onwards, she wanted to become an artist. That did not happen. She instead became engaged to the man that you see in this picture. This is a picture from their honeymoon. It's taken in Copenhagen. And they were engaged to be married in 1872, and then was married on a grand scale in 1873. Within the first 7 and 8 years, or 8 years, they got three children, Mathilde, Elisa, and Peter. And a few years after they got married, Frida Hansen's father died. So at that time, her husband became a leader of the trading house owned by Frida Hansen's family, and also the trading house, his own family's trading house. And these were both the biggest trading houses in the city. So they were quite rich, and had a lot of money, and they moved out to Hilleborg from the city center when her father died. So Frida Hansen very much wanted to become an artist, but she had her hands full with children and running a household, and they also traveled quite a lot abroad, so she was able to see what was going on the artistic scene around within Europe, within the European context, which is quite important actually. So she knew what was going on, although they lived here in Stavanger. So what did they earn money on? Well, they earned money on sail ships and on herring. This is a sail ship that was built by Frida Hansen's husband. It was state of the art. It cost twice as much as any sail ship I had before. And when it came into and anchored up in the harbor of Stavanger, it was on everybody's lips. And they talked about this fantastic sail ship. So what did she do? I mean, she had a household, she ran a household, she had children, but she really had to fill her days with something else. She had artistic abilities. And what did she do? Well, she did what a lot of women in her position would do. She started to make a garden. And what she dreamt of, and I quote, I dreamed of the most splendid compositions, she said, flower-filled terraces with sculptures, grottos and hanging gardens. Who knows what I would have concocted? It was almost like Ludwig of Bavaria in miniature. So she said that she started and she remade the gardens at Hilleborg, and she did that with a trained landscape architect and his men. And according to Réseau, who wrote about this garden later in life, he was when he was old, he wrote a book about how it was to live in Stavanger back in the old days. He would talk about how they would run out to Hilleborg, to Frida Hansen's house. The garden was open for the public, and they would see things like this, and I quote, "In the garden, there were aviaries with peacocks, turkeys, and guinea fowl. There was an aquarium with turtles and exotic fish. In the park, you could find rare and exotic flowers." So, thinking of what she talked about when she talked about Ludwig of Bavaria, of course, these are two pictures from some of Ludwig of Bavaria's most famous castles. The one on the left, Neuschwanstein, of course, the one that most people would know about. That castle had no garden. So I think when she talks about Ludwig of Bavaria, she must have meant Linderhof, which is the one on the right, which has a big garden. So looking at a map here, which are from the archives, in Stavanger, you can see, can you see my mouse? I hope you can. So we have a park here. These are the two houses that I showed you a picture of, and this is also part of the garden, and here, and possibly also a little bit up here. She had a greenhouse, and this is where the sea comes in, and this is the stables, and where they have their animals. So Hilleborg was very much it's a big farm, as well as having these splendid gardens. Well, there are not very many pictures of her garden, although the best one is the one here, where you see Frida Hansen together with her mother and her little daughter. And this is from approximately 1880, and up here, on the top, you see the main house where they lived, and this is where her mother lived after her father died. So what kind of a garden did she make? This is something that we try to find out, but there are not very many pictures, although I have found a few. What was popular in Norway at this time was what they called a landscape garden in the English style, which is a sort of more of a hybrid between a landscape garden and what we would call the classical Victorian garden, where you have artificiality close to the house, the way that you see here with the carpet bedding. It's more a garden in line with Humphrey Repton, and not as capability of Brown, just to to mention a few of the British landscape gardeners. Of course, there was a stream coming into the garden when Frida Hansen's family first made their fortune. They made it from a mill, so they had a stream running through the estate, and of course having a fountain was important in any garden, and especially a garden of this scale. Here we have another picture, as you see, not a very nice one, but you can see the fountain and a little bit more of the planting. Well, the luxurious living that Frida Hansen was used to, it did not last. About 10 years, when they had been married for about 10 years, at that time, Frida Hansen was about 28 years old. They were declared bankrupt. It was a financial disaster. And as you see, and that happened in January 1883, the depth of their two firms, Klaugensen, her husband's firm, was 2 million Norwegian kroners. Köhler & Co., the depth was 2.2 million. And if we look at the total government expenditure in Norway in the same time, during 1 year, that would be 1.7 million Norwegian kroners. So you see the kind of debt that they had. And throughout the city, a lot of the trading houses fell, one after another. So it definitely was a devastating time. But what must have been, and I probably say this as a mother, must have been even worse, that just a few months later, her youngest child, Peter, dies at an age of 3 years old. So what did they do? They moved into the city centre to live, and they lived in this street here. And you see, this runs behind these houses here, and I hope that you can see my mouse. So they moved in to a flat which belonged to Frida Hansen's mother's family, and she moved in here with her. Frida Hansen moved in here with her sister Marie and her 2 children and her mother, and they survived on Marie's annuity. Frida Hansen, I forgot to mention that. I put it on the slide, but she had 2 older sisters. One died when Frida Hansen was 10, and the other had a brain injury, so she had to be cared for the rest of her life, and it's that sister's annuity that they live on for the first years. Her husband went abroad to New York and London to get something to do, and he ended up in the mining industry. So what would she do? She needed something to do, and what would be appropriate for a lady at her position in society was to do textile handiwork. That was a very respectable option, and she set up a needlework and embroidery shop in her mother's living room. So apparently she was quite good at that, and had quite a lot to do. So how did she come into becoming an artist? Well, that transition from running an embroidery shop to becoming a tapestry artist has been described as somewhat accidental. However, she had been interested in old Norwegian textile art earlier on, and one of those who sort of said to her in the beginning that she should try weaving is her brother-in-law, who's represented here, who was an artist as well, represented with this little picture here, Setesdal's boy looking out. He had a collection of Norwegian textile art that was kept in the brewery house, situated in the park that you see below here, which was a summer residence of Frida Hansen's mother-in-law. In that garden there were a few follies, and one of those folly was an old brewery house with this collection of old tapestries and Norwegian textile art were kept. So according to Frida Hansen herself, she said that there was an acquainted once who came into her embroidery shop with an old Norwegian tapestry and wanted her to fix it for her. And then she says, and I quote, "It went through me like wildfire. Yes, that I would now do. I would learn how to make weavings such as this and make them available as decor, but also in order to provide a livelihood for many. Thus began the career that filled my mind, satisfied my artistic yearning and my life." So the thing about Frida Hansen is that she was not only become a very well-known tapestry artist, textile artist, she was also a businesswoman, which is quite remarkable. So with this, so we're thinking that, okay, she now know what she's going to do. She heads to Sogn, to Lærdal, to learn to weave on a vertical loom from a woman called Kerstina Haglum, and she does that in 1888. At this time in Norway, women were encouraged to work with homecraft. And this was a time when Norway en masse were rekindling an interest in folk culture to sort of revive and look back to see what would be in a Norwegian identity. This is, you probably don't know that, but in 1814, Norway had got our new constitution. And we were looking back into history to find our cultural identity. We had been under Danish rule for a very long time, so we had to go back to the Middle Ages to find that identity, and this rekindling and that interest in folk culture is definitely a part of that. And the Norwegian Decorative Arts Museums were promoting this rediscovery of ancient Norwegian weavings. So Frida Hansen heads to Sogn to learn this, to weave on a vertical loom, because that was a type of loom that were looked upon as more the traditional loom, and it was very much believed that the way that Haglum was weaving was in the style that they would weave in the Middle Ages. So when she comes back to Stavanger, she quite soon after she comes back, she produces her first pictorial tapestry. I will show that in a second. It's called The Young Håkon Håkonsen is Carried Across the Mountains by the Birkebeiners. Håkon Håkonsen was one of our kings from the Middle Ages. And she was not very happy with the colors that she could get, so she sets out also to make facilities for plant dye, and she traveled around in the outskirts of Stavanger to what is called the Jæren and the Ryfylke, in the fjords here, to find recipes for old plant dye so that she could make her own colors and make the tapestries have the colors that she wanted. Not only did she do that, she also set up a workshop for handmade Norwegian tapestries. So the foundation for her later artistic practice is very much something that she starts on, this endeavor she starts on in Stavanger. And this is the tapestry, the first tapestry that she made. It is based on the painting by Bergslien, the Birkebeiner soldiers smuggling Håkon Håkonsen over the mountain. Of course, this sort of really fits really well into what we call the Norwegian soul, with these skiers and this little king that they carry across the mountains. You can see that the tapestry is enclosed in a border that very much echoes the traditional Norwegian tapestries from the Middle Ages. What Frida Hansen said later in life, that this was a failure, this tapestry, but she must have learned quite a bit about it. The faces, she didn't know how to weave them, so they are embroidered onto the tapestry, and she had to make quite a few adjustments because it's not even. That is not so easy to see on this bad picture that I have here, but that's what they say about it. What she learned from making this tapestry was to never use a naturalistic painting as a weaving pattern. She found out that the pattern of a tapestry should be made expressively for weaving, or at least be thoroughly stylized. So you need to sort of consider what kind of a medium that you have and make art by using the specific techniques that are suitable for a vertical loom. But however, what she wanted to do was to get a new artistic direction based on old tapestries with simple plant-dyed colors. So I said that she was inspired, as many others, from old Norwegian tapestries. This is a tapestry that's in the collection in Ålesund. It's called an åkle, which is an old traditional Norwegian way of weaving. Åkle means a geometrically patterned weaving that they used as a bedspread or as a decorative wall hanging. And this motif is called skybragd in Norwegian. This specific one was exhibited in Bergen in 1898. And it's very much based on old traditional Norwegian weavings. And you can see an example of this here. This is a piece from the National Museum in Oslo's collection. It's by an unidentified woman, and this is the kind of tapestries that the decorative art museums would collect in order to enhance and also to enlighten and see what was there from old age. So you can see how Frida Hansen has used this type of motif in her own tapestry, but sort of simplified it slightly in this artwork here. If we move on, we see how she, in a pattern like this, sort of enhances or sort of develops the motif and makes it into heathers, which is a plant that you can find wild in the Norwegian forest, as you can in many places. And this is taken from a tapestry book, a pattern book, I mean, and these pattern books are held by the National Museum in Oslo. So if you are making and you can go and see them there, but you have to make an appointment in order to do so. So after a while, she felt that she had learned enough. She wanted to move on, and in 1892 she moved to Christiania, which was the name of Oslo, which is the Norwegian capital. And here you see Frida Hansen sitting in front of her vertical loom in her house that she built a bit later than 1892. Her house is the one that you see on the other picture on the very top It's a house that was built by Frida Hansen, who was one of Norway's first, she was Norway's first female architect. She worked in the Art Nouveau style and had actually been working for Victor Horta in Brussels before she came back to Norway. So, so Frida Hansen, she moved to Norway. She set up a small weaving studio also in Oslo, and did consulting. She taught weaving, and her biggest customer was the Norwegian Home Craft Association. For them, she designed patterns, created weavings, and was their main supplier of dyed wool yarn. She, however, after a little while, she quit working for the Norwegian Home Craft Association due to a conflict over patent copyrights. So when working for this association, she did not just work for that association. She also made her own tapestries, and what the Norwegian Home Craft Association wanted was a percentage or what she earned on those tapestries that she made for herself as well. And Frida Hansen wasn't so happy with that, so this conflict that they had was settled in court. And what in Norwegian we call it the Husflidsforeningen. They relinquished the right to use her weaving patterns, and that fight is quite important also because she stood up for something that nowadays is it's regulated by law, but in Norway law protecting pattern designs was not ratified until 1911. So moving on, this is a tapestry she made 3 years after the first one that you saw in black and white. It is one of her biggest tapestries at the time, and it was made as a commission for the Norwegian Women's Organization, and it was meant, and it did participate, and it was intended to represent the organization in the Women's Pavilion at the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893-94. Frida Hansen was a member of the exhibition committee, and this tapestry was, as I said, a part of that exhibition. This is more political in a way than many of the other tapestries, and it is our guess, and Tua writes about that, is probably because it was a commission for the Norwegian Women's Organization, and it uses the dandelion as which was a symbol of the feminist movement. And as you can see, the whole leitmotif of this tapestry is the dandelion. There was published a small catalogue in connection to the exhibition, and in that catalogue they also explained a little bit about what the tapestry was all about. And in the catalogue it says, and I quote, "The central woman is an allegorical representation of life." And you see her in the middle. The 6 figures carrying dandelion buds represent the future. Those carrying blooming dandelions symbolize the present. And those carrying flowers going to seed represent the future. And these are the figures that you see here. Of course, when you look at this tapestry, the whole tapestry looks as it's based on a church floor plan. It has sort of a medieval character, a rather Gothic character, I would say, as well. It has, she has also text written onto the tapestry or weaved into the tapestry, and I've translated, and it's been translated here. So on these diamond shapes here, they represent the nature's cyclical time. Here we have winter, over here spring, up here summer, and here fall or autumn. So here are the 4 elements. This is fire, water, air, and earth. And then within here, this is taken from a hymn, and it's and translated it says, "The bell hammer strikes, time takes flight, eternity is our next sight." And on the very edge here, this is taken from a Norwegian writer called Henrik Wergeland, and it says, "When the dandelion, when the field lies dark and lush with dandelions, the herb that grows, the more it is tramped." Also, of course, referring to the flower or the weed, we would say, the dandelion. And again, it's the tapestry is filled with dandelions in the middle, all across. So at the same time, when looking at this tapestry, it's very much in line with the arts and crafts movements, sort of looking backwards to the Gothic times. It's plant dye. It's something that she weaved herself. It's revival of an old tradition and of an old techniques. Also, good to know is that the arts and crafts movement were held in high esteem in Norway, and William Morris as well. So, but looking at this tapestry, I also think there are a few other things that could be said about it, which is my interpretations, because I cannot see this tapestry and not thinking of Horte's conclusion, and that is Latin for an enclosed garden, which is the a garden of Eden, a garden where you very often have Virgin Mary is very often depicted in the Garden of Eden or an enclosed garden. And when we look at this, there is a glass painting up here with Virgin Mary and the disciples. Also, it's I can't help but also look at these as symbols. For, I mean, roses are very often connected to Virgin Mary. A red rose is often connected to the flesh, to the blood, and the white rose to the flesh. And also along the edges here, you see that there are flowers and there are thorns here. So these are probably roses, and a rose hedge is a symbol of paradise, protecting Virgin Mary within, and then the thorns would keep the evil out. So that's a sort of a classic symbol of a rose hedge, and I think that's I cannot help to interpret her artwork also in this direction. Of course, there are other sources of inspiration for this tapestry as well, and what Tuhe really points to is the old Norwegian textile tradition, here represented with 2 pillar cases. You see the cross section here sort of looks a bit like Frida Hansen's tapestry. You also have the geometrical border around here, and you have these sort of diamonds. These represent, in a way, if you mix these together, you find these sort of diamond shapes that Frida Hansen had in her own tapestry, the dandelion. Of course, I'd like to take this a little bit further as well, and then compare the dandelion tapestry from this with this altar frontale from the Trestford Church. It's Gothic. This dates from the Gothic period, where you see Virgin Mary in the very middle with the Christ, and you can see how it's divided up into these squares, and you also have the border along the edge. You see something similar here on the other picture, the altar frontale from the Basel Cathedral, now to Musée de Cluny in Paris, where the main figure stands within these columns, the same way that Frida Hansen put her female figure. So, however, Frida Hansen was not just concerned with old Norwegian textile. She also she looked a lot at on the impulses from mainland Europe, and was very much occupied with that in the late 1890s. So here you see two tapestries that she made with the motif using mermaids as a motif, which is a very common motif during the day and also in Nouveau. The one to the left, mermaids lighting the moon, she made quite fast after she returned from a study trip that went to Cologne and Paris, and it is and it's actually the first tapestry that we acquired for the collection. We bought it, we got the local bank, that's why it says Spider Bank and SR Bank. The local bank bought it to us so that we could have it and display to the public in Stavanger. And that happened as late as 2008, actually. So anyway, these are Nouveau style tapestries. She won international recognition for them. In Norway, thinking where the critics were very concerned about building a national identity, they were a bit too, they thought they were too much inspired by international influences, and they were a little bit skeptical towards that. The tapestries that you see here is in what we call the transparent technique that she patented in 1897, and she won. And these tapestries were very quick. They were critically acclaimed across Europe at the time. This is the tapestries where she alternates between woven and unwoven parts, which makes the light sort of glow through. I mean, they get this sort of a translucent character, when if you hang them in the middle of the room, light can reflect through the tapestries. What is also important to notice is that Frida Hansen's women are very much, they're not victims, they're not something to be looked at, they are very much active, and she depicts her almost just female figures in the tapestries. And when you compare her mermaids, which were, I mean, these were common motifs in the Nouveau style. If you compare them to a few artworks by her cousin, who was also an artist, Olaf Lange, who's one of the artists in our collection. And these are two pictures in our collection. The one to the left called Seaweed. These are color etchings, and the other one, women impaled on butterflies. This is a completely different way of depicting the female body. The seaweeds, they're just stuck there, they cannot do anything, just being sort of, they just float around with no will and power, and the other ones are crucified on these butterflies. So looking at Frida Hansen, comparing her artwork to Olaf Lange, quite a different story. So when she, quite a few years after she arrived home from her trip to Cologne and Paris, she set up a new weaving studio. This was something that she established with a woman called Randi Blair, who was a feminist, and together they established what is called in 1897 what was a shareholding company called Norsk Årkläder and Billedteppeveveri in Norwegian, with the abbreviations NABV, that is translated Norwegian Årkle and Pictorial Weaving Studio. That changed name in 1899 to DNB. And when you look at Frida Hansen's tapestries, they are either either weaved in her name, Frida Hansen. She used that most for her bigger tapestries. But with the patterns that she made that could be multiplied, then you would see that these aberration occurring together with the pattern number. So that's how you could know that this is a piece that is connected to Frida Hansen. And these pictures I've taken from Anniken Thue's book. We show where we can see the women weaving, the drawing studio, and where they are dyeing wool. This shareholding company was run on a day-to-day activity by Frida Hansen, and she had the responsibility of 20 women who weaved for and worked for her. And at the beginning, it was set up so that it could weave for others as well as for Frida Hansen herself, and it was set up with a jury as well. So every pattern had to go through a jury to be improved before they set it into production. And she wanted other people to also supply patterns so that they could weave. That did not happen. So Frida Hansen produced almost all the patterns for this weaving studio. This studio lasted until 1906, and at that time she gave away the patents that she had for the transparent technique. So these are some examples of the things that they would weave for the public. I mean, people had to be quite well off to buy these things, but here you can see an upholstery fabric that are now in the collection in Ålesund, called Rose Hips. There is a floor carpet with the motifs quinch in National Museum's collection, and also just this pillowcase in red from the National Museum. So these you could go in there and order textiles for your house, and then pick patterns from the pattern books. So in 1900, she went to Paris and exhibited at the Exposition Universelle in Paris, and some of the tapestries that she exhibited together with her weaving studio was these two that you see here. The a dandelion motif, and then blue roses, both in a transparent technique. And this was her international breakthrough. And these tapestries were an international hit. So the dandelion tapestry, you could have it as portieres, like you see here, or as a bigger tapestry, which we exhibited in the exhibition here in 2015. That motif was singled out as the most beautiful work in the Exposition Universelle, which is quite noteworthy. And she, at the exposition, Frida Hansen won a gold medal for her artistic contribution, and DNB, that is a weaving studio, won a gold medal for their technique. for their magnificent technique. So, and she achieved something that no other Norwegian women artists had managed before her, and that is, in a very short span of time, her works were purchased by museums in Vienna, Zurich, Hamburg, Budapest, London, Stockholm, and Copenhagen. So she was a great success. So that exhibition was a great success for her. There was no Norwegian art museums or decorative art museums that bought her work, which is very strange looking from today. One of the other tapestries that was a big success is this one that was bought right after it was exhibited, and it was exhibited in Paris in the Salon in 1906. And this tapestry, with this tapestry, she was elected an associate of Société des Beaux-Arts in Paris. So this tapestry was bought by a French family and hung in a chateau for a very long time, and we were able to borrow it to the exhibition here in Stavanger, and was later able to acquire it for the museum collection. This is one of her major tapestries, and according to Anniken Thue, it might be also looked upon as a hidden self-portrait. So again, she has text put into her tapestry, and it's in Latin, and it is translated: always moving quickly, never resting, out of the cradle into life, into eternity, O Lord. So these women, they are holding something in their hands. These are attributes. The one in the very front, she holds a little purse with money. The next one holds a candle. The third one holds jewelry, and the last one holds flowers. And these were, according to Frida Hansen herself, violets. And she said about this tapestry that the theme of the tapestry was the individual's restless wandering towards eternity's great ocean, sparkling in the distance. And in a later interview in 1920, she said, the first woman carries a money bag because this plays a big role. The second carries a candle, and the third carries jewelry. That is a representation of vanity, and the last is art carrying violets. So in a way, these women represent the different stages in Frida Hansen's life, and Frida Thue points to the last figure as a figure of Frida Hansen herself as an artist. Of course, there is also something interesting about her using violets in the bouquet, and saying that these are violets. Of course, these are flowers that heralds the coming of spring. This is also a very well-known garden plant that has been cultivated for centuries. It is also they also symbolizes the humility of Virgin Mary, and is very often depicted when Virgin Mary is depicted in a garden setting. The violets, the violas are depicted very close to her cloak. So if we look at some other examples, I mean, when we look at Frida Hansen's art, of course, she would be inspired by contemporary artists of the day, like Eugène Grasset, and pictures like this. But I also think that she is inspired by early Renaissance art. This represented here by Madonna of the Rose Bower from Cologne, one of the most famous pictures in Cologne, and also and you see how sort of the grass is depicted, or it's a dark photograph of a painting, but you can see how Virgin Mary is situated in a garden with flowers, and you see the same in this tapestry made by the pre-Raphaelite Beau Jones and William Morris around Virgin Mary. A lot of flowers again, the same way that Frida Hansen also uses flower in her tapestries. We see one here, for example. This is one of the rare times when she is depicting a fairy tale. So this was looked upon as much more suitable within the Norwegian context. So this is the first tapestry that the National Museum in Oslo buys. Again, we see how the flowers are spreading out on the ground before the castle in the background. And this is based on a fairy tale called Soria Moria Slott in Norwegian, or translated into English, maybe the fairy tale castle, where this lady is trying to find the prince, and the wind is helping her along the way. And here also you see how she uses a border along the edges of the tapestry, the way that she did in Sempervadentis, and also in the dandelion tapestry that I showed you at the very beginning. So, I mean, in Art Nouveau, of course, flora is very much a feature. For Frida Hansen, this probably had an extra meaning, and in later years, she said, and I quote, that regarding her own tapestries, "On the warp, I wove a profusion of ornaments, birds, flowers, and leaves, vividly seen against the background. It was the flora I had at one time buried that returned." And in many ways, Frida Hansen's tapestries can be seen, and the flowers are so prominent in them. So in one way, you can see that how sort of the garden is put into her tapestries, the garden that she lost when they went bankrupt. You see something similar here, just showing you a few examples of artworks in our collection. This called Clematis and Birds of Paradise. You see how she's using open and closed forms within the tapestry to make this translucent sort of a delicate style, which she became so famous for. And again here, a pillowcase and a double portiere in the collection here in Stavanger. This is one of her later tapestries, where that we also acquired quite recently for the museum collection. It's a quite prominent tapestry in Frida Hansen's production, based on a classical Greek mythology motif, where these women are Danao's daughters, being busy filling water in the bottomless tube, that they had to do this task as a punishment for killing their future husbands. And in the very bottom of the tapestries, where you can see the waves, you can also see how she has been inspired by Japanese woodcuts, which many people, artists were at the day, also Frida Hansen. So there are, of course, many things that you can say about her tapestries. And in the book that we made, there is a specific article, a specific text that deals with that. Frida Hansen and the Japanese inspiration. So I'm going to end with the very last tapestry that she made. Frida Hansen worked up until the very end, and this is a quite untraditional tapestry in Norwegians in Frida Hansen's oeuvre. This is due to typical the saga motif, but very much in line with what they thought people should weave in Norway. This one, she was not able to finish this one. So because she died in 19 because she died before she could finish it. So the last part of the tapestry were finished by her daughter Elisa and her granddaughter. This is a tapestry that commemorates the 900 years anniversary of Norway's Christianization, and you can see the Viking ship here and the king in the middle. So this Frida Hansen very much wanted this tapestry to end up in Stavanger. So the citizens in 1934, the citizen collected money to be able to buy the tapestry, and they gave it to the church, the cathedral in Stavanger, which is a Gothic, Romanesque Gothic cathedral, where it usually hangs. Right now it's here at the museum because the cathedral is being renovated, so it can be seen here. So just to end this talk, Frida Hansen, she died at an age of 76, and her artistic career spans 43 years from her first tapestry until she dies. And for those of you who want to see more of Frida Hansen's tapestries, during the pandemic, we made a 3D filming within the room where we have most of our tapestries on display. And you see on the website here, you get the address, where we also have her tapestries. You can see them in our collection, and you can zoom in on details if you'd like to explore them further. So thank you.